Hello, Rochester community, and welcome to the Board of Education, CIGR, Committee of the Whole, Community and Intergovernmental Relations Committee. We are here today to talk about some of the stuff that the CIGR committee will be doing in the upcoming year, including the legislative agenda and also legislative breakfast that will be upcoming in 2025. Very quickly before the meeting starts, I will read the statement. The board expects district officials and the public to conduct themselves and speak in a respectful and courteous manner so as to model proper civility and decorum for students. Shouting, personal assaults, vulgarity, profanity, attacks, revealing information prohibited by law, or any conduct that disrupts the flow of business is considered to be out of order. The board may, along many other steps to law, take the following actions during the meeting to maintain a fair and effective meeting: interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement, request any individual to leave the meeting when that individual, whether in person or virtually, does not observe reasonable decorum or the conduct that interferes with the orderly progress of the meeting, and also a call for a recess or any adjournment to another time when the lack of public decorum so interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting as to warrant such action. And so that's our decorum statement. There are no speakers who have signed up to speak at the meeting today. We do have meeting minutes that's available here on Board Docs. Is there any questions regarding the meeting minutes? Can I get a motion for the meeting minutes?
So moved. Second.
All right, motion by Commissioner Malloy, second by Commissioner Simmons. Any questions regarding the meeting minutes from September 3rd, 2024? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, it carries. So for our first presentation today regarding the legislative agenda and legislative breakfast, we have the Big Five Executive Director, Jennifer Pyle, who will be giving us a presentation today. Jennifer Pyle, you're there?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, the floor is in your hands.
Hi, good evening, folks. And thank you for inviting us to take part today. I am going to attempt to share my screen. I see I'm there twice now. Okay. Okay. So can you see that, folks?
No, we can't see that at the moment.
You can't.
Time, I'll share for her. Ms. Pyle, I'll go ahead and share the screen, and you just let me know when to advance the slides, okay?
Okay, that would be lovely. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Don't utilize Teams, and I didn't know I'd have to do it on this end. Thank you. I appreciate it. So
Give me one moment.
some of these slides I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because some of it's probably information you're quite familiar with and or redundant, but I will try to cover everything that we discussed and that was requested. So first, for folks that aren't familiar with the Big Five, this is my 27th year here. We have been in existence since for 65 years, since 1958. We're a membership organization, a not-for-profit representing the Big Five school districts, which are Buffalo, New York City, Rochester, Syracuse, and Yonkers. In 2014, we had our first affiliate member join. That was Utica, and subsequent to that, Mount Vernon and Albany have come on board. Albany was actually a member many, many decades ago prior to a drop in their population, which put them out of the dependent school district pool. We're just to clarify, we're not out there looking for members. These are districts that came to us because they have very similar demographics and fiscal restrictions, et cetera, similar issues relative to charter schools and other things. And it's been a mutually beneficial relationship in all cases. As you're well aware, central to our uniqueness is the diversity of our districts, the high concentrations of poverty, and your local fiscal constraints. I want to also point out that while we work very closely together and, as we note continuously that we like to speak with one voice on the needs and strengths of urban education, it's also very important to keep in mind that we frequently work on district-specific initiatives, fiscal matters and policy matters. And frankly, all of the other member organizations have historically rallied around whatever that unique need may be, whether it's a piece of legislation or a particular funding concern, and often have even, stated, well, this may not be a good fit for me. I want to support Rochester, for instance, in, whatever their needs are. And that's been incredibly helpful, as is the fact that our members have different representatives in the Senate and the Assembly, even on the federal level, obviously, in some cases, and bringing everyone together to support our causes has always been very, very beneficial. Again, I won't go through the next page on our mission statement, but I think key to our focus and something that we refer back to continuously is that all children can succeed and should be afforded appropriate support and educational opportunities throughout their lives. Relative to our core activities, we do a lot of advocacy and public information campaign. We obviously represent the district and all of our member districts before state government, the Board of Regents. We work really closely with the state education department to support our districts to act as a go-between and a liaison. And that relationship has really been advanced and strengthened in recent years as they have shifted to become more of a consumer-oriented organization. We maintain a data center, disseminate a lot of information, share best practices, and I encourage members to reach out to us if there's information that you're interested in pertaining to what's happening in the other Big Five or frankly across the state. A lot of what we do, again, is sharing best practices and things of that nature. Just to quickly to touch upon the data, and we do distribute information relative to this every year, self-reported or information that we pull from state databases. We represent 43% of New York State's public school students in our 8 districts, 67% of the state's English language learners, and 50% of the state's special education students. Obviously, our rates of student mobility, homelessness, and students living in temporary shelters are significantly higher than they are for the state as a whole. And our school buildings average over 73 years old. I know you're in the midst of phase 3 of your major capital construction plan. When I began 27 years ago, we still had coal-fired furnaces in multiple school districts. So we've come a long way, but as we keep pointing out, there's a lot more work to do. I'm not going to take a lot of time with regard to the legislative process, most of which you're quite well aware of. So I'm going to jump over to the annual timeline, which is what I wanted to really focus on tonight, and I think would be of more interest. At this point in time, the governor's office and the Division of Budget is engaged in development of not only the state of the state that will be delivered in January, but, and you can move up to the annual timeline page if you'd like. Just a couple slides. We meet with the executive branch and the Division of Budget annually to discuss where districts are, to give them a preliminary look at what the next budget cycle looks like. So that would be your 25-26 budget, and to discuss any particular policy issues that have been raised by the Division of Budget, the governor's office, et cetera. We did those meetings very early this year. They've frankly just wrapped up this week. Those were individual meetings with each district, its district leadership, and your financial officers in most cases, that took meetings to, again, give them a very early picture at what budgets look like. We did them early in the attempt to influence what happens in the executive budget that will be released in January, and with a keen awareness that we are rapidly approaching that cliff, and we're deeply concerned about where districts are going to be for 25, 26, and those out years. I'll touch upon foundation aid and what we've been doing there in a couple of slides to give you an idea of how we're involved in those discussions, which are obviously key to a lot of what we're looking toward as we look toward the executive budget release. So right now, they're working on what the governor's budget proposal will look like. In December, the Board of Regents comes out with their budget recommendations. They discussed those this week during their meeting. They also discussed the proposed timeline for the Blue Ribbon Commission recommendations related to graduation standards. And I encourage all of you to review those materials and take a look. It obviously relates to the regions and where we go from here, the projected timeline. I'm going to touch upon a little bit later. It's incredibly exciting. There's a lot involved and a lot to take in, and obviously more information will be coming forward. So their presentation comes out. That kind of lays the groundwork for folks, what to focus on, what to look at. In January, the governor's budget is released. In February, or sometimes the end of January, the the fiscal and education committees have public hearings related to each category of the budget. So in our case, it's the K-12 budget. Your superintendents come to testify as a group. We're allotted up to 3 minutes an individual to testify, so remarks have to be very concise. It's a long day, but it's an expectation that they have that we will be here to speak to the issues and the concerns and positive, negative with regard to the governor's proposal and where we think the legislature should move as they begin their negotiations. We also then move forward. We have our lobby day, which many of you have taken part in, and we hope you will again next year, where we lobby collectively as a group with the superintendents, board members, and staff from all of the big five. We meet with legislative leadership, with the governor's office, we meet with the commissioner. In addition to that collective lobby day, where we speak to the issues and the items that we have agreed to come together on, we have each district again come together. And again, it will probably be virtual again this year. That's a lot easier than making you come to Albany for 2 hours. We again take time to meet with the governor's office, the Division of Budget, Education Committee chairs, and the fiscal chairs with Senate Finance, Ways and Means to discuss Rochester-specific issues. So it's another opportunity to speak to your unique needs, your pressures, your reflections on what the governor has proposed in an attempt to influence what the Senate proposes, what the Assembly proposes, and what the final budget package looks like. When we get to mid-March, those one House budgets are out. And again, our lobby day, your legislative breakfast, those individual meetings generally take place prior to March 1st, because by then they're moving quickly toward their one House proposals, which set the floor for what they intend to negotiate on. And then, of course, the budget's due by April 1st. It's always, it's a little bit, not a little bit, it's a lot difficult for school districts because the state budget year is not aligned with your fiscal year. So, I know that's a challenging thing. You're waiting for that April 1st deadline. You're waiting for a budget to come forward so that you can complete your work. And meanwhile, you're in the middle of your current budget year and trying to bridge gaps. So it's a challenge that we have every year, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a picture of how that plays out. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on some of this, but obviously for the budget, I kind of outlined how advocacy works with that. Just so you know, in addition to those formal meetings we have with districts in the fall, in February, lobby day, and we're continuously being engaging in conversations with Senate Finance, with Assembly Ways and Means, with the governor's office, with the Division of Budget, with SED on our proposals, on your state aid request, and on our collective request to provide information, to give them backup details, data, to even walk through language, what would work, what wouldn't work. And we're in a lot of back and forth with the districts quite frequently I'm constantly reaching out to how would this work? Has that, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, but with cell phones, for instance, and the cell phone ban that the governor is proposing, how does this work? What has the district done? How would this be problematic? Or even digging into issues related to instruction that I'm obviously going to rely on your folks who have expertise in those areas and in what is working and not working in your district. So there's a lot of back and forth throughout this period. It's not just at these points where we're engaging with folks in Albany. On specific issues, we do often share with you and your districts opportunities to comment on proposed regulations, so that you can do that formally and or informally. There are public hearings, and we often take time to ask districts to comment in writing and or to reach out to your legislative delegation members if there are particular issues that we know they want to hear directly from you. Foundation aid. I'm not going to go through the whole foundation aid history. I know you're probably well aware of the lengthy amount of time it took to fully implement foundation aid. I know that the proposed advocacy document is just still being worked on for 2024, 25, 26, and we'll speak to these issues. But I did want to let you know a couple of things, and we can move on to the foundation aid recommendations page. We've spent a lot of time engaging with the Rockefeller Institute on the study that they were tasked with pursuant to last year's budget. Unfortunately, the amount of time that they were given will not afford them the opportunity to do a real deep dive or another costing out study. However, they're well aware of that, which I'm glad, because there are certain things that will require additional time, additional study, but they're also have been very willing to agree to the fact that there are many, many things that can be done sooner rather than later. And I would kind of call it tweaking, working around the edges and making changes to particular formula components that are hugely problematic and disadvantage Rochester and the other urban and high-need school districts. So we've sat down with Bob Magna and others at the Institute. We spent, I think, almost 3 hours, my staff and I, meeting with them one afternoon. We've talked on the phone repeatedly, and we've brought each and every district in to meet with them to discuss your specific needs and every other district and their specific needs. And they've been very interested in getting as much information as they can. So just to give you a few points relative to what we've really been focused on. The poverty data that goes back to the 2000 census is obviously hugely problematic. That's one of the key points. We've emphasized the fact that whatever's put in place needs to be dynamic enough that it can respond to changes and changing needs, whether it be an influx of migrant pupils, special ed, or other cost factors that you can't wait another year to receive reimbursement for. We, again, have asked that they do at least some changes in the 25-26 budget, even if they intend to recommend a more significant and deep dive into the formula. And going back to our key items and our key focus for foundation aid for many, many years is a push to have the formula that's more transparent, predictable, and is equitable. The piece that relates to that we keep focusing on and each district has been focusing on is that it needs to be a system that reflects your unique student needs. And right now, that's not the case. While your enrollment has declined significantly, some would say, the needs of your pupils have gone up, exponentially. And therefore, it's not as though you have the luxury of reducing your costs. So we've continued to emphasize that. They've listened. Their recommendations are due on December 1st, so we'll see how much they listened. Keep in mind that those recommendations are only that, recommendations. So what the governor's office and the Division of Budget chooses to do with them, we will have to wait until January to find out. The last piece that is very core to, frankly, most of our conversations on issues is that we believe resource allocation decisions are best managed locally. You know where your money is best spent. You know what you need. And the set-asides and additional direction and, all of those pieces, we continue to argue against because we believe, again, those decisions are best managed locally. You have a better handle on what's working, what's not working, and where you need to direct your dollars. The next, I'll go through, some of the priorities that frankly are collective priorities, but they're also on your agenda and I think really, really key. First, charter school. There is a plethora of charter school problems, issues, and recommendations that we've focused on. We have been working with our stakeholder partners and the Educational Conference Board. That includes the New York State United Teachers, Superintendents Association, School Boards Association, PTA, school business officials, and school administrators to advance a lot of the items I'm going to talk about, including the charter school recommendations. And we've led the work with regard to charter schools in many cases. We've drafted a lot of the legislation. We're hopeful, again, that some of these will be advanced. The saturation issue is, again, key. It's huge. You are so far beyond the point of, being able to withstand the fiscal pressure, and your enrollment, has shifted, has changed because of the saturation in your district in particular. We, again, and to be clear, we do not oppose charter schools, but we're opposed to the system that's currently in place relative to funding and the inequities. So the saturation is number one. Number two, we have pushed for SUNY to be eliminated as an authorizing agent. We don't believe they should be in the business of K-12 education. They're not in any other way, quite frankly. We would like the regents to be the sole authorizing authority. And I know that's aligned with what the district has pressed for. A couple of other key pieces. We've been pressing for an independent entity to be created to oversee dissolution. We were successful many years ago in having the statute changed so that the money that was given to charter schools for pupils when charter schools closed went back to where the kids came from. However, that's not happening. There continue to be a number of, golden parachutes, or they just frankly have failed to respond to any inquiries from SED. So this is a point that we find difficult for anyone to justify that they should be able to close, dissolve, go out of business, and just, we never know what happens with the revenues that, most of which came from the public school districts. Lastly, just a couple of things. We've had a huge issue in recent years with recouping excess payments to charter schools. Again, that's hard to understand how anyone could argue that if they receive overpayments, the money should be returned. Unfortunately, there's nothing in the statute that affords SED the ability to allow that. And then lastly, just to jump around a little, the accountability and the fact that their enrollment continues to not mirror what the traditional public schools pupil demographics look like. And that is something that has been a problem, since their inception, that we continue to push against. And I know most of these have been contained in your priorities as well. Just a couple of other key priorities that are in the Rochester request and in the Big Five request. Special services aid. You and all of our districts, frankly, operate some of the most innovative and successful career and technical education programs in the state. The per pupil funding cap is at $3,900. The way the formula works, no one receives that, and it is not aligned with what it costs to run these programs. It has not been adjusted in decades. You also cannot receive funding currently for ninth grade pupils, even though many programs begin in ninth grade or would begin in ninth grade and should begin in ninth grade if you could receive support. So those are two key issues with that. Funding for English language learners continues to be a huge focus. We discussed this with the Rockefeller Institute, and we continue to press for an increase of the weighting and a categorical program not set aside, but a separate category of funding to support the work you do with English language learners. Pre-kindergarten funding continues to be a focus. The amounts that districts receive for universal pre-K again, are not aligned with the cost for these programs. Health and mental health, that's obviously been huge in recent years. Those needs, as we keep explaining to them across the street, which is behind me, but kind of dark for you to see there, those needs were there in February of 2020, and they've only been exacerbated. The fact that you have to beg every year for that additional 1.2 million that you receive on top of your fixed school health funding amount is ridiculous. And again, none of these amounts are aligned with what you have to spend. So this is an area that the governor has focused on, has expressed interest in supporting, has put some money behind, but we continue to talk about the needs there and the need for additional funding, and the fact that you should not have to beg every year to get that additional 1.2 million. Instructional materials, again, I'm sure well aware, it's been frozen for decades. Increases are required. The digital divide became all too apparent during COVID. I had many conversations with folks about the fact that it was very difficult to pivot to online learning and virtual instruction when our students didn't have their own devices. And once we were able to get devices in kids' hands, they didn't understand across the street that that's not a one-shot, one-time thing, that devices break, they get lost, they have to be sent out for repairs. So it's an ongoing need, as is the need to update the technology. So we continue to talk about the inequities there and the need for additional aid. Transportation, I want to focus a little bit on here. This is an issue that is longstanding, and frankly, Rochester was at the forefront of conversations over a decade ago with the state relative to the fact that children should not be required to walk up to 1.5 miles to and from school, regardless of their age, for a variety of reasons. And again, if you choose to do that for some, then you risk, you have to do it for all, and you get a reduction in your funding if you do that. So we did have a number of bills that were put forth relative to this issue. We will be advancing legislation again this year that would be for Rochester only, as well as a bill that would be for the big 4 upstate cities. Sometimes it's easier to advance something that's for all instead of one, because then you have everyone coming together to support the issue. I think that we have an even bigger case to make right now, because approximately 2 years ago, the state took action to adjust the school safety zones, which are transportation-related zones that don't apply in the cities. And the large cities, I mean to say. They apply in small cities such as Albany, et cetera. They adjusted the school safety zones to enable them to have expanded use, expanded funding. They were able to transport kids for shorter distances when there were safety issues, et cetera. So now there's a huge inequity that small cities now have this luxury, and the large urban centers, including Rochester, have no ability to receive funding if you choose to transport kids below that distance. So we continue to press on that. We recognize, everyone, if they come back, we believe you, we understand, but it's money. How you can possibly argue that this isn't a place where they need to find the funding is troubling, to say the least. But we will, again, be advancing legislation. What we have put in place in the past has stated that you would have to go to the commissioner, go to the department, indicate why you believed you needed to transport certain students, certain schools for shorter distances, be it a 1/2 mile or even whatever distance you set. And the commissioner would then make a determination that that was reasonable and you would receive aid for it. Just a couple of other things that you'd included and things that had come up that I think are really important. The legal cost judgments and the New York Child Victims Act. We've been engaged in a lot of conversations regarding this. There are a number of bills that would provide funding. We've even been in conversations about where are there some funding sources for something like this that is really, kind of a one-time thing. It's not something you're going to need in perpetuity for 30 years. So we're hopeful they can recognize the potential impact and the need to support districts with this. The positive school climate, solutions, not suspensions. We've obviously had a lot of conversations about our districts. Most districts are in support of exactly the same language that you've included in your document, particularly relative to those younger grades. So that's a joint issue. Teacher staff shortage, recruitment and retention issues are huge, huge, huge. Again, working with our ECB partners has been very beneficial, particularly with NYSET. We look forward to continuing to do that and working with the department and our districts to find ways to streamline and open up those pathways so that folks, non-traditional staff, again, working with your teachers, working with your unions to find what would work best to enable you to fill some of those shortage areas and to begin to grow your own and begin to assist students who may want to move into teaching. And lastly, to assist some of your staff who may want to move into teaching, but are not able to step away and attend school full time, and things of that nature. So those are issues that the commissioner and the department have been very engaged in, and we continue to focus on. And lastly, for this slide, dedicated funding for professional development. That's something that, again, it's an inequity because if you're a component district, if you are a member of BOCES, you can receive funding, you receive professional development assistance, et cetera, et cetera. We have no dedicated funding in the Big Five for professional development. Just a couple of last comments. We started last year in 2023, so this April was our second annual student conference, and some of your students came, actually incredible kids, came to lobby. It was incredibly impactful, and the members were thrilled to meet with them. They were quick to set up meetings, to spend time, to bring them on the floor. We're going to continue to do that annually. It was a great year to do. We had a great event this year. And just two other things. I think that it's really important for the district to continue to talk about the progress that's been made and talk about all the good work that's being done. You've been working closely with your monitor. You had the school closures, the plan that you had to put into place took a tremendous amount of work. The relationships, the engagement with the community, your phase 3 JSCB, which was a huge undertaking, is well underway and going incredibly well. So I think there's so many good things that are happening that we do try to take these opportunities when we're meeting with folks and discussing Rochester and other districts to give time to focus on the positive work and the direction and the commitment that is there. So it's not, all too often, there's too much focus on the negative. So that's something that we encourage you to continue to do, and we're happy to work with you on that and to ensure that everyone knows the full story. It's not just a focus on the negative. And I think, well, if it's okay, can I say one other thing? Lastly, a couple of issues that we think are going to creep up in January, well, we know will creep up. We were actually called into a meeting with the governor last week on the proposed cell phone ban. The governor is pressing for a bell-to-bell system wherein students would not be allowed to have any access or utilize their phones from the time they arrive at school until the time they leave school. We have concerns with what's been presented. First, forcing that on a district without affording you the opportunity to ensure that the culture and those relationships and you have the ability to do that in a way that you believe is beneficial and speaks to the issues of media literacy and other things that they claim they're interested in dealing with. We're also concerned because there would be reporting requirements annually. We've asked that they take a close look at when that would go into effect and what it would look like relative to disparate treatment when it comes to discipline. And obviously ensuring that certain students are not disciplined in an equitable way. Again, nothing that anyone could argue against, but this top-down approach that would mandate that you put something in place as early as the fall of 25 is a concern. We have a concern with unintended consequences of that. You would have to post the discipline system you have in place. Your instructional staff, under what's being considered now, would not be engaged in any of the discipline. So it would probably have to fall to your principals or other administrators. And there would be, at this point, no assurance that any funding would come, for example, for the pouches or whatever method you chose to implement. Again, we're concerned about unintended consequences, about an unfunded mandate. Some districts are utilizing, put them in your locker, keep them in your backpack. They haven't been able to tell us whether that would be allowable. So that's one issue. Second issue, I think we're going to see something related to early college high schools and or dual enrollment proposal in the governor's budget, which are great. I know you have some great programs. Everyone's interested in expanding them. We're just concerned that they first look at what you have and ensure that the funding's sustainable, and work with districts on making sure that those credits are transferable and that they're working with higher ed, et cetera, because we know there's been a lot of discussion and concerns with regard to that. So we don't want it to be like pre-K where you have like 5 different systems, 5 different funding streams, and programs all over the place with no assurance of sustained funding. And then lastly, of course, the foundation aid piece. We continue to impress upon the Division of Budget and the governor's office that despite declining enrollments in most of our districts, your needs continue to grow and the needs of your pupils continue to grow. So it's not, as simple as looking at that, nor is it as simple as looking at, well, look at the reserves this district has and that, because COVID and the federal funding you received changed the entire playing field. And while no one expected that the state would be able to fill the hole that the exhaustion of the federal funds created, they certainly don't want to be forced into a position of getting rid of some of those really critical pupil support staff that were brought on with some of the federal money, guidance counselors, social workers, psychologists, et cetera. So again, that's an issue that we will see how things play out in January, but we've been spending a lot of time sharing information, bringing your folks in to talk about the needs and the concerns and the fact that the good work you're doing, you don't want to fall back because you don't have the funding to sustain it. So sorry for a little bit of rambling, but if you have any questions, I'm welcome to take them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Executive Director Powell. We appreciate it. Very insightful presentation. I also want to say that when we're asking questions, let's also keep in mind that we also want to start thinking about priorities for the upcoming year for 2025. As you can hear, it's going to be an interesting legislative year, so we want to start thinking about those things. Of course, we want to keep our legislative agenda. We don't want it to be 3, 4, 5 pages, so we want to try to condense as much as possible. But as we heard from the executive director, is that a lot of times there are legislation that's on the state level, on the federal level, sometimes even on the local level that creates an inequity for our district, and sometimes there's a lot of that. And so I know that it's not easy to get it down to 1 to 2 pages, but it's important that we condense it so people understand exactly what we're focused on, and we really mark in on that. Also, inside of our board docs, under the legislative priorities with executive director, you'll see our last year's priorities, so you are able to review that as you're asking questions. So now I'll open up the floor to questions. I'll come down the line, so I'll start off with Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you. Executive Director Piles, thank you so much for your presentation this evening. In fact, I'm going to be referring back to it over and over again. I learned a lot and will continue to learn a lot as I go through it over and over again. I just wanted to say thank you so much for presenting a potential transportation bill for the school safety zone. I know chronic absenteeism is such a problem in our district, and kids can't learn necessarily if they aren't at school. And I know that's a huge barrier for so many of our students. So I hope that happens for our district. I don't know what the likelihood is, but I'd like to remain positive, and hopefully that is something that can be implemented here or a bill that can be passed. I wanted to know if there is any talk about, in terms of unfunded mandates, in terms of early literacy, has there been talk with the Big Five schools surrounding that, early literacy programs or science of reading, and kind of that unfunded mandate that we dedicate more professional development towards that with our staff?
So I haven't had conversations recently relative to that particular piece being an unfunded mandate. But that's certainly, and again, I think that folks are very cautious about talking about anything that, it's one of those things, for instance, where, they have a curriculum mandate or something of that sort. And if we say we have a problem because it's unfunded and, you should do this and we should, and then they say, oh, well, you don't believe in that. You know what I mean? Like,
Right,
that
right.
difficult. But that being said, I think that feeds right into the fact that you need dedicated money for professional development, and they can't keep piling things on you and expect that you're going to be able to implement them with fidelity without finding the money somewhere.
Yeah.
And frankly, most of your money goes to people or mandated services. So, whether that's what I keep saying, well, do you want, like for cell phones, do you want us to do away with X number of classrooms if we have to buy pouches, or whatever it may be, because there's only a finite amount of resources. So I haven't had that direct conversation, but I think that's an area where, if, to the extent you can quantify that and talk about what it's taking, what's required, and we bring it back to the fact that, component districts receive funding, they have a COSER, they have, for a lot of these things that we don't. And again, we have a longer way to go in many cases and a lot more people to bring in. So while we haven't talked about it that way, I think it's something we could absolutely wrap in to our advocacy efforts and point to as one of, the additional pieces that you've put into place, that it's on its surface, fine, we want kids to be on, on grade level we understand by third grade. If they're not, then but you have to put money behind it.
Yep. Great. Thank you so much. And that's all I have.
Very quickly, I'm going to allow the superintendent to respond.
Yep. Just to further respond to your question, Executive Director Pyle did say that we all met with the governor's office in Singleton's, every single district. That was one of the things that I actually brought up with the governor's office, saying that the 2.2 million or so that was provided for professional learning, for the science of reading training and whatnot, pretty much won't hit the districts. And that we definitely need to put some more money towards that if we actually want the results that we should get in terms of our students reading at grade level.
And certainly that's a board conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that, if we can get an agreement, because I believe that our legislative agenda, and this year we have our board goals, and I think that everything that's coming out of this board should be reflective of our board goals. And even looking at last year, there's a lot of priorities on there that has been reflective. But literacy is one of those things that I'd love to see one of our priorities to be around literacy. And so, I feel like that conversation was right around there. And so as we're talking about forming the legislative agenda, I'd love to see, and I'm sure the other commissioners, and you guys can disagree with me if you don't, but to see some priorities revolving around literacy and reading inside of our legislative agenda. So we're around our board goals, as we should be. Commissioner Simmons?
Thank you, Commissioner Santiago. I was excited to hear a lot of the pieces that are being focused on, namely the transportation. SUNY, right, they don't specialize in this level of education, and the revised foundation aid is exciting to hear about. I think my question was answered. Anyone who knows me knows that it was going to be around literacy, so I'm happy to hear that. I briefly saw the governor at an event, and yeah, during the picture, I was like, hey, so that $10 million is not enough. She was probably like, what? But yeah, it really isn't enough. So dedicated dollars toward literacy, maybe if it's enveloped again under the professional development, but that intentional, as Commissioner Santiago stated, intentional parsing of it is very important, that we call it out explicitly, especially for this district. I know it's everywhere, but it's here. And then the early college piece, I was so happy to hear that there's, thoughts around there. There's so many wonderful schools, and that is one of the questions I had as far as transferable credits, how does that work? But also, do you feel that if that is something we bring into the conversation, that it will be also around fidelity to the actual models that are presented? Because sometimes you can have these pieces in different districts, including Rochester, but if they're not exercising the model, the way the model is written, then you're actually maybe causing a dichotomy in what they can actually do. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that that's really important to point out, and that's where we'd gone in conversations with the department, and frankly, even with the governor's office. Earlier in the year, I went to DC with them at their request to talk through some of these issues on a federal level. I agree with you that you talk about fidelity to the model and transferability, et cetera. That's what we keep pressing and trying to explain to them. You need to address before you add additional programs and additional models on. We've taken the time to give the governor's office, directly from your folks, they've come into meetings with the governor's office to outline, here's what we have, here's what we're doing, here are these issues. So we'll continue to work on those issues because what good does it do? Yeah, if you have a kid graduate and they have, they have enough credits for an associate's, but they're not transferable, or the college, why is higher ed in some cases saying this, that, or why do you need to have remediation, or why do there all of these silos and this disconnect that's existed is what we've been trying to break down.
Yeah,
and we've talked with. Go ahead.
I love it. I could sit here and talk to you all night about it, but I know I can't and I won't. But yeah, it creates such an issue. I don't understand. I mean, even bringing them in, they have to come in at a certain level even, and so I don't know. It's a gross, it's very irresponsible not to follow models. That's all I can say.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why it's great when folks talk, we've got early college, we've got this, but yeah, if they're not going to work with higher ed and ensure that, then what good is it? So we'll continue to talk, and please reach out at any point. We'll continue to talk through that. We've again been pressing state ed, and they're well aware because they are dealing with higher ed, right, and K-12. So the commissioner understands, at one end or the other, we've got to work together and we've got to figure out what's going on before they keep creating new programs. And again, all I can liken it to is what they did with pre-K, which is we now have so many programs, so many different rules, so many funding streams, and it's been nearly impossible to fix that. So I don't want to get in a situation, nor do you want to have a program where every year you don't know if you're going to be able to keep it because there's no sustained funding.
Exactly.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
Do we have any other questions? You do? President Elliott?
Hi, Jennifer. How are you? President Elliott?
Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see you too, as always. So, my issue, my advocacy has to do with the transportation age and the 1.5 eligibility. And so Chairman Santiago have talked in the past with regard to, we know those legislators who are in support of it, but I'm also interested in speaking with those legislators who may be against it so that we can in some way help to try to persuade them for the need for this 1.5, the reimbursement of this at the 0.5 level. So I'd be very happy, I'd be interested in us, how do we talk to those folk who may be on the, maybe not as adamant against it, but some people that we may be able to talk to about it, and then to talk about the discrepancy or the inequity, where smaller school districts were able to get it and our district was not. So, if you can support us in identifying who those legislators are who are against it, that we can have conversations with them.
Yeah, and so honestly, I've never had a legislator argue against it.
Okay.
It's the fact that nobody can get the division of budget and, leadership to move because it costs money. And, I think part of the problem is they can't necessarily quantify what that amount is. So we've gathered information in the past and said to districts, tell us what it would cost you to move all kids down to 0.5. And some of it's a guess, we understand. But I think that that's kind of where we need to go back. We need to come up with, some sort of estimates. We've also said to them in the past, in fact, again, Rochester was a pioneer in this area. We said, look, hold us harmless. Let us decide how to spend the transportation money. Don't give us any more, but don't cut us, because in the long run, we argued, and Rochester did some work on this, over a decade ago, that if you gave parents the opportunity to choose schools closer to home, which feeds into community schools, et cetera, then some would indeed do that and more would do that so that you would end up in a situation where you're transporting more students for fewer distances and it actually saves money. The layout of your city and the school choice, which all of our districts, have to some extent, makes it really incredibly expensive and difficult for you. And while we don't want to, we've said we're not going to press families. We're not going to, go back to segregation where you tell people you're going to go to school here, you're going to go there. But right now, your families don't have a choice. So I think those things and getting into the safety issues and the other circumstances, and the fact that you may have a kid in 2 schools, so you don't even have the capability to get them both, or you're working and why you shouldn't be picking a school based upon the fact that your kid can get transportation.
And just one last question. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. So I think we need to keep really pressing that there's a huge inequity now. And you recognize the problem for the small cities, but you didn't do anything for us. So pushing, the division of budget and pushing the members who say they support it to really, press for this and talk about this is money that needs to be spent.
So that would be one of the issues if I believe we normally will meet with the Office of Budget, correct? And so that we could talk to about Rochester. And then just one last thing around the electric buses. What's the conversation on it at this point? Because it seems that we will have to pay for that, our districts, because it's mandated. Is that one of those unfunded mandates?
Yeah, so even if your transportation aid goes up at this point, your local share is going to go up too. There are so many unanswered questions, and it's already difficult enough, particularly in your region and central New York, to find those contractors. And now, they're going to pass anything they have to incur onto you. We've talked about, they don't understand that you're in such a tough place with drivers in many cases and contractors that you're doing multiple runs and so how is that going to work, and is it really feasible? And then you don't use yellow buses for high school, so again you're going to have your your municipal bus service having to take on this. So I don't see this happening as quickly as they say it will. We've been engaged in conversations with legislators who are heavily involved in the work, and with others there have been some pushback. Now I know, as you saw, that one of the NYSBA positions related to doing hybrid versus fully. So we'll keep you posted, but we're definitely very concerned, because even if your transportation aid ratio stays the same, more money means a bigger local share. Everything's going to be passed on to you, and who knows if it's going to make it even more difficult to transport your kids.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. And I also want to say, when we're doing those advocacies, when we're in Albany, I think it would be good, and I know that we have a lot of stuff to focus on. We have 5 districts, that has a high population of students. But I think it is also important to really focus and key in on certain issues that we think we can get progression in. And I think transportation should definitely be one of those. Do we have any other questions for the executive director? Commissioner Griffin.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to say that I think it's ideal that we go back to that the people in the areas go to the school that's in their district, because for myself, and I always reflect on the things that I experienced in the district when I was going to school, it worked. It was successful. So I think that would alleviate a lot of painstaking things that you mentioned, especially when it comes to bus and transportation. This is the downside, though. the problem is that we have strategically made other schools more I don't know what the word I'm looking for. A lot of parents choose other schools because they like the process. They like that they have the CTE, so they have more. They have more than other schools. So the question is not that we are doing something that is really against the parent. Is what we can do to make all schools the same as the others so that the parents won't have a problem. See, back in those days when we went to school back in the 80s and the 70s, it was every school had the same thing. So why and how we had other schools get more incentives or more CTE programs and other incentives that the other schools didn't is beyond me when we had the money to do so. I don't know how it was allowed because it should not have been allowed to have one school have more than the other. So we need to, I agree that we should do that, but first thing is first. How do we bring all the schools at the level of like our East High School or our Edison, who has more CTE programs? And then I don't think we would have a problem with the parents, but trying to move them and drive them to a school that is not going to give them their child the success that they need is absolutely going to be a problem. And me as a parent, I would have a problem. So I think first thing is first. Great ideal, fantastic ideal. Let's do the first thing and let's make all our schools on the same level and same pathways to success as we have done with the others. Then I think it would be no problem at all. But it shouldn't even been broken in the first place. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we got that. So is there any recommendations for new priorities or for any priorities from last year to be removed? It sounds like many of our priorities last year were pretty strong priorities, but I don't move away from the fact that there may be some recommendations for certain priorities to be moved. I think there's also been a consensus of adding a priority revolving around literacy to this upcoming 2025 legislative agenda. But I also want to take the time now before we hand it over to the administration to do their work in the background. If there's any other recommendations for the legislative agenda for 2025, whether that's removing or adding. Commissioner Malloy.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with what you said earlier, making the bulk of our advocacy around our board goals, literacy, math, and our ninth grade cohorts improvements and on being on target for graduation.
Yes, yeah, and I fully agree with that. Making sure that this is around the board goals, and that is student focused. And I'll say I looked at it, and it seems pretty student focused. It seems pretty board focused. But you know how we can kind of form it into a little bit more focus towards the needs. Yes, Commissioner Simmons.
Yes, I was just going to say, I like where you were going as far as consolidating the list as well. I think we had a very robust agenda, but I do agree that it should be compressed quite a bit. And so figuring out how to do that is going to be good for us.
Yeah, I believe right now it's at like 2.5 pages just about. And so I think it'll be important to get it down to about 2, which is kind of hard because some of this, we have a lot of issues, a lot of issues that we can't fully control, and we have to create an agenda because it takes us having to go on a higher level of government to advocate for those changes to happen. And so we just want to make sure that it is deliverable for people to know how to read it, to understand what our ask is, and also for when we're advocating for it, that it's concise and it's to the point, and we're able to advocate for what we need to advocate for. Is there any other recommendations or ideas from any other commissioners? I'm going to very quickly ask our state monitor, do you have any recommendations?
Thank you, Commissioner Santiago. Thank you, Jennifer, for the presentation. It is going to be very important that the board is very vigilant about what are the needs of the district. The board identified 4 goals last March, and it is very important that those goals are going to be aligned with the strategic plan on how to move the district forward. It is also important to talk to the other Big Five school district to see what are the needs, the priorities that they have, so you can join forces advocating for the Big Five together. Jennifer and the team, they do a great job getting meetings with the elected officials. I can say that the Rochester delegation is very supportive, but if you join forces with the other school district, I mean, the message can get out there about CTE, about health services. Like Jennifer said, every year for the last 20 years that I've been going to Albany to lobby for Syracuse, you have to lobby for that $1.2 million for health services. There's no reason, there's no excuse for that. That should be part of the budget, and that should be including that every year. You shouldn't have to be begging for that money. The kids in Rochester deserve the best, and they should know better than that. So let's focus on the 4 goals that the board identified, and everything begins at the elementary level. Let's get them ready to read so we can move forward and make progress.
Absolutely. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you so much, Executive Director Pyle. Do you have any, final statements before you head out?
No, just, I think that you guys have done a phenomenal job with putting together your priorities. It is difficult to capture things, in a succinct manner because there was a lot of really important stuff in here. So, maybe consider making your key points, even if it's bolded or set apart, and then giving the backup information below. So if someone does want to go through and get additional information, they can, but they can also lift out, what the key points are, because again, you do a really great job, and I think these are all really important pieces, and they will be echoed by your counterparts in the other districts, which will only assist you as well. And thank you so much for the opportunity to present tonight.
Very quickly, Executive Director Powell, President Elliott and I were over here. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that at some point, maybe not for this particular year's legislative agenda, but at some point, we're going to have to begin to advocate around redefining what chronic absenteeism is. We got to have a different definition for that. Because and while we want our kids in school, we also understand that there are issues that go on at home that may prevent them from being in school. I was just talking to the superintendent earlier today. This is where I remember when we were really involved in really in the throes of FMP, and I said 10 years ago that at some point, I don't know what I'm talking about, but at some point, we're not going to need as much brick and mortar. And so we're discovering that, based on even COVID and those kinds of things, we've got to find different kinds of ways in which we educate our children. And so if they happen to be suspended, for example, let's do some kind of work around, and I was talking to the superintendent about this today, some kind of YouTube instructions or something so that there's not the learning loss that can occur when we have our students being absent an extended period of time. So may not be for this particular legislative agenda, but this is something that we really need to address with our legislators. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to say I fully agree, and I know that it may be a process in between, our Board of Regents, our New York State Education Department, our legislative body, but I think that we have to advocate to open up the ways of learning. I think that throughout the generations, and throughout circumstances that generations have faced, and throughout the new opportunities and technologies that we have today, I think that we have an opportunity to reform some ways of learning and bring in new ways of learning. And I know that we have a system that requires this old process, but we have a new generation with new circumstances and new issues, and so we need new solutions, new ideas, new things, and processes for our young people to learn. So I'd love to have that conversation at some point. It doesn't even have to be on the agenda. I just hope that's something that we're constantly advocating for in our places. And so I'm sure that we're not the only district speaking about it, but I'd love to see that. But if you don't have anything to say, thank you so much for jumping on, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Take care.
Bye.
Up next, is there any other comments or questions about the legislative agenda for 2025? All right. Next, we're going to very quickly go over the legislative breakfast. I'm going to turn it over to our clerk, Wen, to go over that.
Thank you, Commissioner Santiago. Evening, Commissioners and community. Before I jump into that, I just want to clarify a little bit more about our internal process for the legislative breakfast. This conversation was to give the administration a high-level kind of overview of where the board would like to go with the priorities, and the consensus overwhelmingly sounded like it was to connect the board goals to the legislative agenda. So Chief Lopez, who is the liaison for this committee, will work from the administrative side to bring forward more refined goals, or excuse me, priorities around that. And then typically we ask to have the legislative agenda priorities added to subsequent committees, because this committee does not meet often enough to achieve everything by the date that's necessary to put these forward. And so I'm just going to transition into that conversation. At the recommendation of Executive Director Jennifer Pyle, we have moved legislative breakfast up from last year when it was in March, and this year it is slated to occur on February 8th, which is a Saturday. It should already be calendared for everyone, just so you know. This year, we will host the event at Edison Tech.
Excuse me, Madam Clerk. Could you
sorry,
slow
sir.
down a little bit for me? I'm not catching everything. Thank you.
Apologies. So I'll just back up a little bit. So this year, the date for the legislative breakfast will be on February 8th. It will be hosted at the Edison campus. The focus will be around CTE. And this format, and going back to the school, will allow for an interactive experience for all of the attendees, which would include tours of CTE classrooms and spaces, presentations from teachers and students, and then gallery walkthroughs for other CTE programs in the district, so that individuals walk away having a full understanding of the things that have occurred through our CTE program. And to Ms. Pyle's recommendation, really being able to talk about the successes of those things, but also the needs of it. CTE has been a staple on the legislative agenda for at least the last couple of years to really advocate for those needs. So the planning for that has just begun. And so collaboratively, the administration and the board staff meet to ensure that that process happens.
Yes, thank you. Last year, when I was having discussions with some of our state representatives, we were speaking in March. By the time March comes, priorities have been set. You know, the budget is just about on the train to being voted for. And so we noticed that that might have been a little bit too late into the year. So that's why it's good that we're moving it up to February this year. And again, CTE is important. And so I'm excited about that. CTE is something that, you know, excites me personally. So I'm excited that that's what we'll be focusing on in this year. And so that's it for the discussion about the legislative agenda and the legislative breakfast. Can I get a motion to lift resolution?
So moved.
Second?
All right, I'm sorry. Can I get a motion to lift resolution 313A from the table? Motion by President Elliott, second by Commissioner Malloy. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That is now lifted. Is there any comments or questions about Resolution 313, which is a review of Policy 2111.1? Yep. These are a lot of numbers. President Elliott, how you do all this? Yeah. Any other questions? Any questions or comments? I'll bring it over to the clerk.
So you need a motion to bring this up to the floor now that you've gotten a motion to table it. And
Okay.
This is just for clarification. This is the policy that you all tabled at the business meeting, which relates to the school liaisons.
Yeah, that's what, yeah.
Okay. So now I need a motion to do what? Review.
To approve the policy with no amendments, and then you'll ask for
Okay.
questions.
All right, so then that's what we'll do. Can I get a motion to approve the policy with no amendments?
No, we didn't discuss it.
Discuss it after there's a motion on the floor.
So moved?
Motion by Commissioner Malloy,
thought we approved
seconded
it,
by
but we
President
haven't
Elliott.
it, though.
Is there any questions or discussion revolving this policy?
That's why we discuss it now.
Yeah, but we were supposed to discuss it first before it was approved. That's what,
It's not
For
true.
discussion now.
We're having that
This is the
discussion now.
process.
Yes,
It's
this is
open for discussion now.
approved.
We're just
We
putting it on the
approved the
table.
motion to, okay, gotcha.
After we ask
Just wanna make
questions,
sure
then
we're
we
on the same page.
approve.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry about
Is there
that.
any comments, Commissioner Patterson?
Thank you. Yeah, once again, just my thoughts as individual thoughts as a commissioner that, I would like, both our council and the independent monitor to weigh in on their thoughts on this. I think, I've mentioned this since I've been on the board, that I thought there were, too many committees. And that was confirmed in, one of our most recent meetings by some. So I'd like to hear from these two individuals. I respect their opinion. Independent Monitor has been around for a number of years. So I'd also first like to hear, from them, and then I give you my thoughts. But I think we're on the same page when it comes to reducing some of these committees, doing a committee diet.
Thank you, Commissioner. This policy is the board member school visit policy. It does not pertain to any specific committee. This is just the board member visits to school policy.
I apologize.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Griffin?
Yes, this is, just so we're clear, this is about the parent liaison when people visiting the schools, is that correct? Or board liaisons, right? Okay, yes. So I do have some concerns about the actual verbiage that is under the liaisons. I feel that as a liaison, I go to visit my schools, and there's a lot of people that may not be able to, or they are not able to visit the schools. I don't feel that this particular the liaison should be governed under the president. I think that this particular as a board liaison, we should have it so that it's not someone controlling the narrative and people not being able to be a liaison at schools or not being able to visit schools. I think the verbiage on this needs to be addressed, and it shouldn't be governed under the president because it can be a conflict of interest or biasness in the selection of the schools that are being given to each board member. So I think in reference to that, I think we definitely need to address how we are as board members being given the schools, because some people may have more time than others, and I think that if you haven't been visiting your schools and you haven't done so in the past, I don't see why why other board members or commissioners that are able to visit schools and grow that relationship as a board commissioner collectively for the board. I don't know why we shouldn't be able to do that. But I do believe that this particular policy needs to be addressed, and the verbiage in it needs to be changed.
Thank you. Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. Although I understand some of the concerns that Commissioner Griffin is bringing up, I would argue that this entire policy, like even having liaisons to begin with, is counter our goals as a board to become more student outcome focused. And I believe that when we focus on individual board members' behavior and how they visit their schools, or when we make it about each other or the presidential power, et cetera, we're getting away from our charge as board members, this is my opinion, from being student outcome focused. And because of that, just with the training that I've had through the Council for the Great City Schools, I don't believe that we should even have liaison roles within individual schools. I think that visiting schools is actually very important for commissioners to do, but I think perhaps moving forward in the future, obviously we're not deciding this tonight, but perhaps we can revisit this as a board about how we visit our schools. Maybe we do it in small groups of commissioners, so we're not violating any, open meetings laws. I think it's important that we know, or are familiar at least, with our schools. But I think when you have individuals as liaisons to schools, it is very easy to get in the weeds of the day-to-day operations of a given school. And I've certainly been guilty of that. And I think that, I'm the genesis of transformation. We can all, I know, right? I hear the giggles already. But no, like as we truly become more student outcome focused, is that having a liaison role within a given school, is that helping us get to what we need to be as a board? And are we truly being student outcome focused when we have that role within a given school? But again, I would love to see all of our schools in small groups I think there are other ways that we can address school visitation policies, or maybe change the policy as a group moving forward at some point. I have loved serving as a liaison to schools. I know that there are sometimes concerns about, if you have family members or your own children attend a particular school. I think it would be great if we had an opportunity as commissioners to visit all schools and that we're not claiming ownership over particular schools, that we're working as a board together to look at all of our schools collectively. So sorry to take so much time, but thank you for listening.
Commissioner Patterson?
Yes, thank you once again. I just, for me, I think it's a conflict of interest that we have, commissioners that are overseeing schools or liaison over schools that have children and relatives in those schools in itself. We talk about, even when we go into a school, there's a perceived some type of power or authority, that we talk about just being who we are as commissioners. And I think that's even more so, when, you have a child, in a school. So for me, again, I agree with my colleagues at the other end of the dais here that, I don't think there should be any person or commissioner directly overseeing or liaisoning over any school, that we should all be, as they do in some of the suburb schools that I know, going to these schools as a collective, that we can put a date on the calendar, that the majority of us, when we're available, that we can meet, at those schools and tour those schools together. So, again, so I'm against, so we're clear, having any liaison, to any, schools.
Yes. I will also, very quickly, I would love to see, and I do wonder, what does the other big 5 districts do regarding this? I know the suburb schools have their own things, but we're not a suburb school. We're not a suburb district. So I do wonder what the other big 5 districts do revolving this. And I think that this is gonna be like a much bigger conversation, which I also think we should bring Great City Schools for All in when we're having this discussion. I'm going to go to...
What'd you say? I didn't hear you.
I'll let you know. I'll go to Commissioner Simmons and then our state monitor.
Thank you. So I love the conversation. I love school visits. It's the highlight of me serving as a commissioner. So, and I'm right at my school visit time now, so I really get energized. But not only energized, and I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. But I also, it also informs how I lead and understand the work that I'm doing, because it is important work. I do, Commissioner Santiago, like what you said around exploring what this looks like in other districts. I know, being on just traveling, going in other spaces, I've heard other districts who serve as liaisons and what they saw. I think there's a conversation or some clarity that needs to be happening, because I don't know if people truly understand, and that's from the community all the way to the commissioner, as far as what a school designated liaison really means. I think some people may see it as the advocate for that school, and even though we are assigned to a school, does not make us the owner of that school. And I think with a sober mindset, most of us understand that. But it also is something that's concerning, because it can be abused in the wrong mind frame. But when I look at points 1 through 5, and I'm not going to read them to you, but I do like the idea, because when I go to someone's school, regardless of my position as commissioner, I respect it as someone's house. Each school community has a leader and leadership team assigned to that, and I do not walk in as a commissioner with my head up my behind, walking in there thinking that I'm going to dictate who does what, when, how. And what I think is important, that is, if we walk into a school community and we see concerns, that we know how to bring that information back in a very viable way to the leadership here in the district, which would be our superintendent, to then manage those things. So giving advance notice, you don't know what these leaders have on their plates. We sit here and we have these aggressive board goals. We want people teaching, but then we want to go into their schools and dictate what they do and how they do it and how they look that day. That's not okay. So giving advance notice, if someone comes to my house, I want you to call ahead. I want to know you're coming. So that is okay with me. If we look at number 2, shall notify notify the principal, yeah, that's the leader of that school. If someone comes to my daddy's house, he's the leader of my home, and you better let him know you're coming. Notify that individual. Don't you dare walk in here. No other staff members should be overriding their principal, letting commissioners in. I don't care what our role is. If you want respect, you have to give it, and that is how it is dictated. Number 3, visit the schools designated to them at least once annually. I think that's the least our school communities deserve. And if you can get in there more and you have that rapport and they invite you to different things, be there when you can. Definitely be there and support. And then I'm going to shut up. Number 5, direct concerns or opinions related to the education program to the superintendent of schools. And I already said that one. I'm off my soapbox.
Yeah, yeah. I'll also say it's also always good to have a relationship with those principals, but not only have a relationship with them, but not stepping beyond their boundaries. But also, this is the conversation that we're having, with our. I'm not gonna try to say their name anymore because I get it wrong every time. Council of Great City Schools, yeah. Or I'm gonna just start saying, I am the transformation of the genesis of transformation. You guys don't know who I'm speaking about. But I just think that it's important to create those relationships and not overstep these boundaries. And how does accountability look when these policy boundaries are being broken? President Elliott?
Yeah, I think that the intent with this policy, and I believe that one of the criticisms that we had years ago is that school board members did not visit schools. So I think that although this was here when I got here, I think this is an attempt to ensure that there is board presentation, is that visibility in the schools. And so the fact that we have liaisons, we are assigned as liaisons, I think that that's just a matter of order, because it does not preclude other board members from going into the schools. And I think that, the more we can get board members in there, the better. But I think that it is important that we're just not aggressively showing up. I mean, I've shown up to the school and say, hey, I'm just in the area, just stop by, no big deal. If the principal is not available, I'm just here, just wanted to make a presence. And so I think that the policy itself, I think that it is a good policy. I think that, in terms of, and this is my opinion, and whoever sits in this seat as president, I think that somebody has to make decisions in collaboration with, with the commissioners about who is assigned. So it's not about who's in the seat of presidency, it's about the position of presidency. So that's important, that still needs to, there still needs to be some order. But I support this policy. I think the fact that, we can also advocate for these schools, because they'll share things with us that we could bring back to the superintendent. So I just think it's really important, and we may not be available to go as a group to these schools, and sometimes I think that may be even a little overwhelming. But I think that the intent of this policy, it was, for the better. And I support the policy. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to say that, like, as far as like in the school building, whenever I've gone there as a commissioner, the people there have always loved to see me, a commissioner there. The students love to see the commissioner there. The teachers love to see the commissioner there. And so it is about what are you coming for,
Right.
and what's the intentions behind that. I got to go to the state monitor first, and then I'll go back down the dais.
Thank you. I just want to remind the board that as a Commissioner of Education, as a board, you are advocate for the entire Rochester City School District. You were elected by the entire community as a Commissioner of Education. You were not elected from School 33 or from Edison. You have to be advocate for all 22,000 students, for 44 buildings and programs that you have in the district. This is a way to make sure that there's representation in the buildings, but as a commissioner, you don't have the power to go and tell people what to do
Right.
in the building. You selected a superintendent, you selected a principal. If there's a problem in one of your visits, you need to come back and tell the superintendent, not to tell people what to do on how to do it. Ed Law talks about visit and how to do it. So this is a way to engage more, to be more visible. Sometimes if you're working during the day, you're not gonna be able to visit the school unless you take some time off. But it is important that the visibility is there, but to remember that you're advocate for the entire district, not the school building that you're liaison, the entire district.
Patterson?
Thank you. So for me personally, it's like, I don't think it's overwhelming, for, us to come in there as a unit. I think that these kids, our children, they want to see us, working together in unity. And I don't think they often see us as board members doing that. They see us as individuals. And again, I keep going back to, I think it's what Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If we want to reimagine a different way of teaching and learning, we must be willing to do things different, as far as changing policy when it comes to this. So I'm not talking about what it says here about who goes into schools and how you go into the schools and things like that. I'm basically talking about a liaison over a school that in the suburbs, and I'm very familiar with that. I know for a fact, in speaking with our state independent monitor here to my right in Syracuse, which is one of the big five, they go in as a unit. And sure, not everyone is going to be able to make it to the walkthroughs if we do them, but if the majority of us can make it, I think that's a win-win situation, because then again, it's showing our community and it's showing our kids, our students, that we're working in unity. And, what's the saying? Adult behaviors don't change, or student behaviors don't change until adult behaviors change. So we have to be willing to change our behavior.
Okay, so we're gonna go down one more time before we bring it up to a vote. If it fails, it fails. If it passes, it passes, and then we'll go from there. I'm gonna go to Commissioner
Isaiah,
Simmons.
when you get
Yes.
when you go down the line, I do want to jump in too.
Okay, I got it. President Elliott, do you have anything else?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Simmons?
Okay, yeah, and, again, at the top of my conversation, I did point out that I am open to having conversations down the line, not tonight,
Yeah.
but down the line, to explore maybe what it looks like in other districts. And I will speak for myself as far as concerns around going in as a unit, because we have to recognize the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And one of those main dysfunctions is a false sense of harmony. And so being a unit, I do agree with unity, but I agree with the reality of unity and what it takes to get there. And so we can't just put on a unified front. We have to actually be unified in our actions. And I don't think our school communities deserve us going in collectively until we figure out, maybe not perfectly, but how to execute as commissioners unit, because we'll bring that energy into their schools during those visits. And so that's something I think, if we move that in that direction eventually, we want to make sure we do that well.
Absolutely. Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Simmons. And yeah, I would agree that visibility in schools is so important. Again, I'm always in my schools, and, I take time off from work in order to visit my schools to make that happen. As a teacher, I want to come there, during the school day. And I know that that's not something that everybody can do. Again, we're not making a decision tonight about what that's going to look like, but I would encourage us to work closely with our Council of the Great City Schools, our coaches there, see what other districts have done, as Commissioner Simmons said. What does that look like in other districts? I know just in my cohort work, whenever I've spoken to other people from the Council of the Great City Schools, people have been very surprised that individual commissioners were assigned to particular schools because they have very different models that don't reflect that. And these were large cities like Cincinnati, et cetera. Again, I've never had an issue with this policy, but it might be part of that policy diet that we begin discussing in the spring. And again, it would be under advisement with our coaches, who might give us some great recommendations. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Griffin?
For me, I think that we should table this, and I think we should write out what we would like to see different or change within this policy and come back to it. It's obvious that people have different opinions, and I think instead of being closed-minded to the changes, I think we need to write them out, go over them, and address them in an open meeting like we're doing so tonight, but we don't need to rush through this and vote on something when I think that we need to table it and go through it thoroughly so that we are addressing the needs of not only the commissioners, but to our stakeholders. And that's my opinion. I don't think that we should be voting on something when there's a lot of open questions and answers and changes that we could do to address the needs of everyone at hand.
Thank you. Vice President LeBron. Vice President LeBron, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I lost Wi-Fi, sorry, and I apologize for not being there tonight. I have to work. But so I just want to point out a couple of things, and I always hate when I hear misinformation from folks. I just want the listening audience to know that this policy does not dictate the president's role. That is through our bylaws. We also follow Robert's rules. And so that is where that lays, and that is not being discussed tonight. Secondly, I do want to uplift every single thing Commissioner Simmons has stated, because yes, to authentic unity. I am not going to ever present to adults or students a fake unity among adults, especially when I fundamentally do not agree with penalizing our children and essentially this like zero tolerance for behavior that some of commissioners have towards Black and brown kids. I ain't gonna do it. And my kid especially, let me just put it out there, my own kids who are in this system. And third, I will support that this policy continues. The policy and even how we present in schools was born out of a certain commissioner's behavior. And had we not had that issue, we would not even have this conversation tonight, but it happened. So here we are. And I do think that this has helped curbside some of those behaviors. And unfortunately, there was other commissioners that came out with other behaviors that this policy doesn't address, but we're not there. Lastly, I would say to President Elliott's point that some of these things are also procedural reasons why they exist, including the liaison roles. There's a purpose and a reason for that. And perhaps we can have someone dig up how we came to be with board liaisons. It wasn't just a thing that happened overnight, but it is more so to also give schools and families from those schools sort of direction on who to go to. Otherwise, we would all be getting massive amounts of emails from other schools, and that still happens. Let me just uplift to what Jaime specifically pointed out, that we're elected to represent all schools. So yeah, we get emails from folks that we're not liaisons to. And that is going to always happen, and we are still obligated to respond to all families. So I don't want any family thinking that we're a board liaison to a school. You can't reach out to any one of the 7. You can. But for me tonight, it will be a yes, and I will go on camera. But I have to get going in a few minutes, so I'm hoping we wrap up the vote. Thank you.
All right, with the comments and questions being over, one second.
Okay.
Legal counsel?
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to highlight one thing that our state monitor said, and I think Vice President LeBron echoed as well. I can't speak to the specific genesis of this in the RCSD, but there is Education Law 1708, and Section 2 of that Ed law says, and it's very brief, each board shall appoint one or more committees to visit every school or department under its supervision, and such committee or committee shall visit such schools at least once annually, report at the next regular meeting of the board on the condition thereof. How other districts do it, I'm not sure. How the RCSD came to have the individual liaison model as opposed to doing it in some other format. There might be some historical reasons, but there is a legal genesis to there even being liaisons at all. So just one thing for the information for the board to have.
Thank you. All right, so we will. That was the last round of.
I just have a question
statements.
for the attorney.
That was the last round of statements, but, and I said that, but, so this is what we'll do. We'll go for the vote. We already did the motion. We did the second. So all those in favor for resolution 313A, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
The motion carries. The policy carries. Yes? Yep.
Commissioners, thank you for passing the policy. Just want to quickly remind everyone on the dais that we still do have board communication procedures. You should still be contacting Francine, not the building principal, to set up your visits. We should also be expecting or allowing the school chief to come, or at least be notified of the visit. And I really, really want to just highlight number 5, direct the concerns and opinions about any programs, curriculums, all of those things to the superintendent of schools, and that's it. That will help us streamline the way things get solved or not, but do also remember that a lot of those purviews, even your opinions, remain in my inputs. It's how we get to the goals that we have set. That is under my jurisdiction. So thank you for passing, and thank you for hearing me out.
Yes, sir.
And so we will do that, and from here on out, the president can definitely, remind us of those things, regarding, how to properly do those things, as we are the board, and we'll work with our one staff member in this district.
She hooks those up.
Yep.
She got me
Yeah,
all the
she
way
knows how to
together.
do it. She
Boom.
knows how to do it.
Yep.
All right, so please don't forget to do the board meeting survey. And now I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion.
Motion by Commissioner Simmons, seconded by Commissioner Griffin. All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.